Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Les for everyone out there. Please introduce yourself. Let them know who you are.
Thanks. I'm Les Knight. I'm a volunteer with the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement. I've been promoting it for about 50 years, and it's really a lot of fun.
Now, you said volunteer, so you didn't create the movement.
I just gave it a name. I feel that the idea has been around for quite a while, and that people didn't recognize it. It was lost amid all of the natalist propaganda, the cultural conditioning. And now that it has a name, I don't think it will get lost again. So I consider myself the finder rather than the founder.
Yeah. Human extinction, that's a word that probably clicked in a lot of people's ears when they heard that. So I'm just wondering, could you explain a little bit about the movement?
Yes. The idea is that Homo sapiens are incompatible with Earth's biosphere. We are bringing about the sixth extinction, and if we were not in existence, that would not be happening. And also, if we cease to exist, the sixth extinction will continue to happen, but there will be fewer lost to this extinction, and the biosphere will recover more quickly. If we continue as we are, which is likely, more likely than everybody deciding to not procreate, we will probably have an involuntary human extinction. So this is, VHEMT is the, voluntary human extinction is the alternative to involuntary human extinction, which is quite messy, a lot of suffering. So a peaceful phase out would avoid the collapse of the biosphere. It's possible that civilization will collapse before the biosphere collapses, in which case we'll have another run at it. We won't, a collapse of civilization won't cause our involuntary extinction, but it will cut our population way down, and we will start over again and eventually be into overshoot of Earth's resources, and probably a lot sooner the next time, precipitate the collapse of the biosphere. But there are several indications that the biosphere will collapse before civilization, or about the same time, because insectageddon, some people are calling it, the loss of insects.
Yeah.
I don't think it's given enough credence. We're talking about greenhouse gas and climate crisis, but I think the crisis of not having pollinators, insects are low on the food chain, and in the web of life, insects are far more important than Homo sapiens. And without them, really the whole web breaks down.
I'm curious to what you saw that made you kind of want to like promote this so much as well too, because it's lost in the general's public. I mean, I've heard I probably stand in the same stance as Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro when they talk about how the population is going to stop at probably 10 billion and then slowly work its way down. I don't think it would be voluntary. I think it is going to be one of those kind of under the radar type causes. Mostly, like if you look at the amount of plastic that's in people's blood now, there's a small amount of these phthalates that have been consumed from all the plastic that we use, which has dropped our fertility count from 97%, my great grandparents, to now it's at 40 something percent. So I look at it like it's going to happen without us knowing that it's happening. And also, I think you need an age gap. Right now, you have babies that are having babies, and then that creates a lot of conflict in its own too. It's why everyone's like the younger generation or these kids, they stay at their parents' house until they're 30. Well, in a sense, that's good because I mean, it's hard for them to go out on their own right now just because the world's a little bit cost effective. But when it comes to them being able to have kids, no, they're not going to want to have kids with at their parents' house. So now you have this gap of kids starting to wait till they're a little bit older to have children. So I think you're going to slowly see that number go from 10 billion, if it hits 10 billion, then slowly just start decreasing. I mean, even if you look at the wage gap or the amount of uh, debt that the US is being put into, and then the population count. It used to be dramatically increasing both of them, but the population one has slowly started to dwindle and to get a little bit slower. Minuscule, but it's slowly coming down, it seems like. Not like the numbers going down, as like the increase rate is going a little bit slower.
Yes, we are increasing at a lower rate, but that's kind of overstated. In 1950, the total fertility rate was 5. The average number of offspring that a couple created was 5. Now it's clear down to 2.4. So, that's half the fertility. This should be great, right? But in 1950, our population was increasing by 35 million a year. Now it's about 80 million a year. It's because we have more people having fewer, and it equals more. So you see a lot of articles saying birth dearth and population growth rate has plummeted. Well, it has. Yeah, it's cut way down. I think it was up to 2.5% per year, which is considerable, and now it's down to less than 1. But at 1%, you get a doubling rate of 70 years, a doubling time of 70 years. Not that that's all that easy to picture. What's
Yeah.
more easy to picture is that we are increasing by 80 million a year, and the Earth cannot stand that many people. We'll never get to 9 billion. We're almost at 8, and we're already starting to see the crop failures from climate crisis and from our use of performance enhancing drugs, which was called the Green Revolution. We put them on steroids, as it were, and now the results are diminishing, so that the increase that that it made us avoid mass starvation and famines and so on, that Paul Ehrlich predicted in the population bomb. Thankfully, it didn't happen. It's happened much more slowly, but we are having famines, and the Green Revolution is now, the debt is now coming due. And as I mentioned, the insects, the loss of our pollinators, it's a combination of these things. We're not going to be able to feed 9 billion people. We aren't feeding 8. 2 billion people today are experiencing food insecurity. How we can continue to create more of us when we aren't taking care of the ones who are already here is the question that we ask at VHEMT.
Yeah, it seems like that also leads into an issue of like I definitely think like our starvation numbers, like especially in the United States, are down. But if you're comparing it to a global scale, there's starvation numbers in Africa, but we don't necessarily feel the need to help out over there because there's not a human aspect that gets attached to it. See, the weird part is we learn to divide ourselves up by our countries, I'd say, instead of looking at it like one giant species on this planet. We look at it like I'm from the United States, or that person's from the UK, or this person's from Russia, or this person's from this. And that's where you start to see the disconnect between people and the emotions that they inflict. I mean, if one nation is like, say, China, for instance, their population is almost double a lot of countries as well too. And I mean, even in the United States, I think it's what there's like 3 million something in San Diego or something like that. And that's more than some places have in their whole entire country in some aspects as well too. It really depends on your region. I think there needs to be better regulations to do so as well too. But you're going to see that involuntary change. You're going to see that you're going to end up making everybody sterile with your plastic consumption, or you're going to make it so not everyone's able to get food, not everyone's able to have a home. But the issue is that do you think that the earth is going to be the one that has to suffer, or do you think it's just going to reset itself and then you're not going to have any life on this planet anymore? I feel like the earth is going to be here for way, way, way longer than human life will be. But do we make us extinct, and do we make everything else around us extinct? And that's when it becomes the problem, because humans making themselves extinct is like the Medea hypothesis that a population is in a sense suicidal with the climate change kind of type deal. But then you get down to, but what happens if we affect other life? And that's where we talk about the insects that are disappearing. You might not notice lightning bugs anymore, but what is that taking away from the environment? The environment's one of the most important things when it comes to just one little thing being thrown off, and then you have a whole thing that's thrown off balance. Do we want to wreck a whole planet from not being able to sustain life anymore? And doesn't that ruin it for everybody else? It's kind of like the kid at the party that wants to go home, so everyone has to go home. It's like that's not how it works. If you want to go home because you have a sick tummy, you can go home, but the rest of the people want to party.
Yes, we do seem to be wrecking the party. Actually, there was a book called The Party's Over, Richard Heinberg, because we've reached peak everything. And we've had a really great party. It's been great, especially people my age. Sorry, everybody, we spent your inheritance. You know, that's why some polls are showing that as many as half of the young people are not, or don't think they're going to procreate. They are having a hard enough time just taking care of themselves. How are they going to bring another person into the world? And that is a major factor. And also, they are wondering if the future is someplace that they want to bring somebody into. I don't think it is, or the odds are slim that it will be a good place. And those two factors are doing more to help achieve the goals of fewer births than VHEMT ever did. I don't know as though we've had much influence on birth rates or even awareness, because the idea is that each one of us has an ecological footprint, and so we affect nature, the rest of the world, quite a bit. And you know, when people think about it, it's like, yeah, well, there's almost 8 billion of us. What's one more? But now what comes right down to the personal, where they can't get a job. Like you say, they can't even move out of their parents' house. And this is not just in the United States. This is becoming a global situation. And if you can't afford, can't get a good enough job to move out, it's not likely that you're going to be co-creating a new human to take care of. I mean, it's still happening. Half of the conceptions are unintended, and so we don't have good reproductive health care. Not good enough anyway, obviously. It is out there, but it's not good enough to help everyone. And there are hundreds of millions of couples that don't have any means to avoid conception other than abstinence, and that doesn't work. And there are forces preventing them from having their reproductive freedom. It's really tragic that some people are not allowed to not procreate.
So
I think, yeah, go ahead.
well, for strategies, for instance, how are you able to effectively spread the message or the movement and have people hop on board? Because I feel like it's like the lobster effect. Even if you talk to someone who says, "I'm not going to have kids," and you're like, "Great, you shouldn't because it's ruining the planet," then they immediately go, "Well, now I'm going to have kids." It's kind of like an authority thing. But at the same time, once they get to that point, and I tell you, like, the lobster effect, which is if I tell you right now from this point on, you can't eat lobster anymore, The reason why is because now you're allergic. You're going to start craving lobster. So as soon as they get to the point where they're in their 30s or whenever there's the last viable option to have kids, or whenever they start talking about it's going to be harder and harder and almost impossible to have kids, then they're going to want to change their mind and have kids. So I'm wondering what like you strategically, or maybe what are you doing just to be able to spread that movement out there to where people don't have these questions, or they feel like there's a forceful action being put on them. I feel like you're trying to get supporters as much as possible. You're trying to get the world to recognize that it's better to do a little bit of self-sacrifice in the grand aspect of what the grand plan, I would say, for the planet is. And I think that's an honorable thing. It's just very, very hard to get people to do things that don't personally affect their life. If it's not going to be in their lifetime, it's hard to get everyone to hop on board.
Yes, that's true. And that's why it has been more, it has affected the birth rate more to have poor economic conditions and an aspect of the future that is not that great. That has done more to get the message out that we should stop procreating than anything that I've ever done. We got bumper stickers and t-shirts and a website, but that, you know, like you say, it is not personal, but now it has become personal. And I think we have a duty to make sure that everyone who has become aware that we shouldn't procreate, that they have the wherewithal to not procreate. This is International Women's Day, March 8th, and the gender equality is the most important social change that we need to help people choose their own lives, how they want to, how many offspring they want to have, if they want to have them, give them the ability to not procreate. The patriarchy and natalist cultural conditioning is fighting against that. But people are more and more saying, no, I just don't want to do that. And I'm not going to. And you can't make me.
Yeah.
Although they are, you know, I mean, accidental conceptions do happen. And in many places, it's illegal to terminate an unwanted conception. And so that is a severe problem that needs to be dealt with. So both contraception and abortion need to be more available.
Yeah. Do you have like, what is your image of the human race? Like, do you look at it in like more of a positive light, or you look more into like a negative light? Because I can get the negative parts. Kind of what I see is like we do a lot more destruction than good in a sense. But I try and keep in my head like there's innovative people out there. For every, one person out of 10, that person's not a piece of shit. I hate to say that, but that one person is trying to progress in a sense of trying to discover more and more and more. And it leads into a bigger question of, is space colonization on your radar? Because that's a real objective idea now with doing all these trips to Mars and going outside of our solar system. And I feel like we're not ready for that. I honestly think that you got to make sure all your eggs are in different baskets, obviously. But right now we have them all on Earth, and we don't have the wherewithal or the common sense to be able to really discuss or come over our problems in such an effective way to be able to travel outside this planet. As a human species, we're flawed beyond comparison. And yes, there's beauty and imperfections, but not when it comes to the destruction and damage that we leave behind. There's a documentary by Bill Nye, where he shows you what happens if human civilization or just the human species was gone and all our buildings that we created stay here. What you'll see moss after 30 years grow through concrete and an old playground, like metal swing set and everything. The vines are growing around it, but that it's like a tattoo. It fades with time, but it takes a very, very long process. So even if we were completely just wiped out by an apocalypse extinction event or a comet or something like that, you're going to still have leftover residue of our history and all these things that we created. So if we start making that on another planet, it even gets crazier. You'll have to make bumper stickers that fit on spaceships out there.
Okay, let's back up a little
I
bit. You
gave you a
started
lot. I
off,
know.
yeah.
I saw you writing down. I was like, he's writing it.
Yeah, because I can't remember that many things at once. But you started out by talking about a view of humanity. This is a voluntary movement, and if we didn't have a positive view of humanity, we'd be the involuntary human extinction movement, because we wouldn't think that humans could make the choice voluntarily to cease procreation. Space travel is a fantasy. I think right now it is a con game to get people to invest billions of dollars that will never, it is just impossible. If you look into it very deeply, there's no way we're going to Mars. And what for anyway? I mean, there's Sahara is sitting right there. All it needs is, well, a lot less than Mars needs: water. It, it has the air already. So no, that's just ridiculous. Con game, basically. So the Bill Nye's special is really a one of many. The first one was a book in 2007 by Alan Weissman called "The World Without Us," and he it was Time Magazine's nonfiction of the year. I really recommend "The World Without Us," because that was the first one. He interviewed people. For example, he went to New York City and the subway. He said, "How long would it take for the subways to flood if we weren't here?" He said, "Oh, 2 days, probably." They are constantly pumping water out of the subways in order to keep them from flooding. And he went into depth on other aspects too. And out of that came the History Channel, National Geographic. There were so many specials, and Bill Nye, about what would the world be like if we were not here. And we can find out, just go to Chernobyl and see that species that haven't been there for 50 years are now returning. They're having genetic problems because of the radiation, but there are bears and
Wolves.
It is like you say, there is a tattoo, a residue. It'll be a thin lens full of plastic when we're gone, but it'll eventually disappear.
Do you think that more generations, like younger ones that are going to be coming up, like the future ones, do you think they're going to adapt to this movement, or maybe this is going to be more known? Because I mean, I'm hearing of it now. So you're having kids my age that are probably going to start hearing it, and then kids younger than me that are going to start hearing it. It's not educated anywhere. It's not talked about anywhere. Everywhere you look on the TV is that climate change, the earth is warming, and there's been a huge fear mongering aspect to it as well, too. For some of it, my own opinions and from the evidence that I've seen from talking to climatologists and everything as well too, I look at it like they're definitely hyping it up because they've been saying the same thing for so ever long. I wish they'd be more honest with it, because I think that what that does is it takes away the effect of the words, much like how people can just toss out the word racist now or toss out whatever they want. You can't label all that, because then it takes away meaning from the word. So now you have a whole bunch of generations of people that are like, oh, don't trust anything on the news networks. Don't do anything like that. Don't listen anywhere. And it's like, well, you got to also be in tune to what's going on around us. That is finding a renewable energy source. That is trying to, because humankind, human species, they don't want to end. Nobody wants to end, I don't think, but maybe we can find a way to be able to reduce a lot of the damage that we're doing. I think the idea that you can completely erase your footprint is impossible. I think it's all about reducing risk your whole entire life of how much damage that you do. Now let's try and find a safe and effective way to make this place more sustainable to a point where we don't have to worry about an extinction. That might be the opposite of, just the whole species dying in a sense. But I try and give humankind the benefit. When it hits that red line, they start to pay attention a little bit more. But I wish we would pay attention more before that red line, because I honestly think we can do major innovations in a sense still left.
It is impossible to erase our footprint, but what we can do is avoid creating another one with a footprint, and we can reduce our own footprint to some extent. But that is part of the consumption versus population debate. And many nations have achieved a lower birth rate voluntarily, but no nation has reduced its consumption voluntarily. And the same is on a personal level. People don't want less. I don't think anybody wants less. There are some people who are practicing voluntary simplicity, but you know, generally speaking, we want more. And half the population on the earth needs more, deserves more. Uh, I think we could provide more for people if there weren't as many of us. If we weren't increasing by 80 million a year, we might be able to care for a lot more people. Tens of thousands of children die every day. Preventable causes. This is a tragedy that's just ignored because it is in the background. It happens all the time. Mentioned earlier about starvation in Africa. People are concerned and we're sending food. But there's also a great resistance to sending reproductive health care. It would only take a few $100 billion to provide universal reproductive health care for everyone. That just
That
people don't.
healthcare thing gets me, man, because I don't know what we talk about healthcare. Because I've pulled up on the show, IHOP's menu, and for a regular person, it's 4,500 calories in a breakfast meal, and it's like, oh, you can choose to get an extra thing of sausage, and I'm like, I don't want to incentivize just because you get free healthcare to eat like crap as well, too. I think there needs to be a better health plan as well, too, when it comes to the aspect of like, but then that goes to prolonging people's lives as well, too, because then we get into the area of like, I think we can live longer and more healthier lives and not have to worry about having kids so young, because right now you're just having a bunch of kids grow up with a lot of health issues. You know how many people in their 20s have digestive disorders, myself included? But there's a whole list of people because they're being put on sugar-free things. They're not properly educated on good food to eat, and I honestly think we've been running off of what we've been running off of for so long, but it's not. You have people dying in their 50s of heart attacks. You have people dying in their 40s of heart attacks, all because fast food is the most viable option, just because it's cheap. That's a society that's backwards. It should be the opposite way. That stuff should be reduced, and it should be more healthy eating, more farm growing, things that are more sustainable for this planet as well, too.
Well, yes, I see what you mean. We've gone from consideration of healthcare. I was speaking specifically of reproductive health care, which is contraceptions and assistance with everything involved in reproduction. And then wider is the health care that is not provided here in the United States, uh, or very minimally so. And that is a large part of the reason that people are dying young. Nobody, people who can't afford it don't go to the doctor. You're right, our lifestyle has a lot to do with it too. We are eating poor food. But if you are going to public school and that is your main meal and it is not good food, that's not your fault. That's not something you can change except on a system level. And we do need to change that. There's speculation that GMOs have a lot to do with digestive problems that are plaguing so many people, as you mentioned.
There's GMOs. A lot of people think buying organic. It's like, well, it's free of GMOs. Well, some organic food, if you really look at it, as is also GMOs. There's an apple at
Not
my
it's not supposed to be. If it's organic, called organic, certified organic in the United States, it's not supposed to be GMO.
Yeah, but if you look at like grocery stores, if it has an organic sticker on it as well too, sometimes a company just puts that on there and somehow it slips through FDA regulations. That's what's
But
crazy.
it is crazy if it's being done. It's not supposed to be done.
There's
If it's
like I said, it's all about tricking the system, and we made profit the most, I guess, obtainable thing. Like you were saying, nobody wants less, everybody wants more. How do we make it so less is honestly better than the aspect of wanting more? If we make that more appealing, like if we had, like, I know there was a minimalist movement not too long ago. My cousin was involved in it as well, reducing everything. But we've made money the way to buy your happiness. And I necessarily don't think you need to buy your happiness. It brings in weird societal questions as well, too. That takes us kind of down a different path than the one that we're on. But I honestly think that if you made things like your movement, for instance, if you educated it more, not you, but like the world was more educated on it, there were other aspects of eating healthier. Like, for instance, during this pandemic, no one mentioned just getting healthy and losing weight. No politician did. There were people that were probably already thinking it and trying to produce it, but that's a major slip up. And that's the way people are afraid that you're fat shaming or you're doing something like that. It leads into some weird areas where honestly, I think this is like not really a mass hysteria, but a lot of people just really trying to figure out what the hell is going on in the world.
Well, we certainly are. And you mentioned something earlier about awareness, and the antinatalist philosophy is catching on far greater than VHEMT ever did. And that, I think, is an awareness that is, once you have it, you probably aren't going to change your mind. The philosophical idea is that it is unethical to bring somebody into the world. They are fine where they are in non-existence, but there's no way of guaranteeing that they will be fine when they come out into existence. In fact, it's certain that they will have some hard times. By putting somebody into a situation where they're having a hard time, that's not very ethical. And so the antinatalist movement, which is just increasing amazingly, I think that's part of why so many young people have decided not to procreate, but it is not being talked about because natalist, which is anti-natalist, is against natalism, but natalism is so pervasive that it influences every aspect of our existence. We just don't see it until we see it, and then, oh, it's everywhere, promoting procreation.
Well, it's like we used to see condom commercials all the time too. Practice safe sex. So, having a kid in some of those commercials, having a kid was seen as like the worst option. But I haven't seen one of those commercials in a very long time. I haven't seen anything like that. They haven't been marketed. I honestly, the commercials I see now are more about food than I see about sex education, which is a large misstep in our society as well too. I think you need to better educate, and that's why you have so many kids. I know I have 4 friends who had kids before they were 17. Like, that's an issue. That's a really big issue. And I think that does come from a lack of education on the matter as well, too. And then to your point as well, there are people out there that don't want to raise kids in this type of world. I mean, that's bad for us to see that our politicians are doing insane stuff. But if it shows you the corporate elites are evil in a sense, I wouldn't want to raise kids here either. There's like a misstep, I would say, there as well, too. I'm just curious to what would you suggest would be things that people can do or things that future generations, I would say, would be taking the first couple of steps. Like if I was going to give you keys to the president's office, what would be the first couple of things you'd start to mitigate?
Well, there'd be reproductive freedom for one, just right off the bat, but gender equality would bring that about. So gender equality first, which brings about reproductive freedom, because women aren't equal if they are harnessed to, pregnant and barefoot and in the kitchen, as they used to say. Teen pregnancy can be dealt with. In Colorado, a pilot program reduced teen pregnancy and abortions tremendously just by offering free long-range contraception. So that can be dealt with. It's not just education. People know that they can avoid conception. It's just they don't have the, it's not available as much as it should be. I mean, everybody can go down to the store and get a condom if they can afford it. And they're given out free in
Yeah.
health departments all over. And a lot of high schools have clinics that give out free condoms. But, people just in the heat of the moment aren't as likely to use them. And
You got to have like
there's,
a service or a butler that comes over and throws it on you real quick in the moment.
yeah, really. Actually, I think probably more fun to put it on yourself and have your partner do it too. But at least make it available. Yes, have a bowl of them sitting in the waiting room uh, or in the lobby of the hotel.
Well, that's got to be like we said, sex education. The way we've stigmatized sex as some type of dirty act, even though we know everyone does it. Like there shouldn't be a problem with someone having an ashtray, or not an ashtray, but like a small container by their door when someone enters their home. But people go, well, you're assuming that we're going to be doing this, and then that ruins the mood. But it's like, no, it's probably going to happen. You're just making sure that everyone's covered in a sense, so you don't get locked into an 18-year contract.
Yes, condoms work especially for preventing STIs, but really long range contraception has been shown to be far more effective than condoms as far as preventing pregnancy. So they probably need both, especially when people are not restricting themselves to just one partner. Yeah,
What about tax on feminine women's products?
there's tax on, I think, isn't there a sales tax on just about everything in most places?
Yeah, but
Not here.
I thought there was like a feminine product tax that was separate. That was like an extra. Because I always hear people complaining about that. I was like, yeah, why are they taxing tampons and all that? They're like, that's a necessity. It's kind of like taxing. Um, I don't know if we needed something because our special region bleeds once a month. Like that would just be horrible. I think everybody would start a riot at that point.
Well, I think they should be free. There are vending machines in the high schools that I teach in that are free. They give pads and tampons free. You just push the button, they come out. And as far as taxing them, every state that has a sales tax has different categories of, some of them tax food, some don't, some tax medicine. And so if the feminine care products are in the category of do not tax, then they aren't. It's just a matter of what state. Like Oregon does not have a sales tax. It's one of the few states that doesn't. And so those products are not taxed.
Do you ever find when you speak around this topic or something like that, you get a lot of people that either their eyes glaze or you get people that just seem to pull away from you? It seems like this would just be a hard topic to, because I found it under, like when I was looking and I found this movement, it was linked right under Church of Euthanasia, which is that everyone should be able to use euthanasia on themselves. And it was like that, I think that throws you in a separate category that's more harder to talk to the public. There's like a stigma attached to it.
Well, there's a stigma attached to voluntary human extinction. The term extinction uh,
But it's for a good cause.
puts people off. Well, not procreating, whether or not we go extinct, is very beneficial to people. People who have chosen not to procreate have been surveyed and they have not been sorry. People who have procreated, many of them, when they have the opportunity to say so, say, well, I wouldn't do it again if I love my children, but I wouldn't do it again if I could do it all over again. And those people are not being listened to.
So your whole thing is like the procreation thing. Is there, I would say, because I'm just trying to figure out how to be able to speak that openly without people feeling like their rights are being taken away in a sense. Because there's a lot of people that feel like it's their right to have a child or it's their wantingness to have one. And it's kind of instilled to you when you're a kid. One day, I mean, every words that we say, a lot of times parents say to kids is one day when you have your own group of kids. Like that just psychologically seems like it imprints in a child's mind that one day when I get older, I'm going to have kids because that's what we're supposed to do. Much like college. Every kid thought they had to go to college, but now you're seeing people become YouTubers or streamers or whatever. And I'm like, that's not, hopefully that wakes them up to a diploma is not your only option. So maybe there's a way to be able to show people that, hey, you don't have to have kids if you don't want to have kids.
That's what we call natalist cultural conditioning, giving girls dolls when they're little. And like you say, asking people how many offspring do you want to, well, they say children, even though they are only children for a little while. That's the short-sightedness of procreation when we say, oh, how many children are you going to have? You don't say how many middle-aged people are you going to have? How many elderly people living in hospice and dying? We only think about them as children. And that is really the part that people are most interested in, because it's the most fun part. I think children are the most interesting phase of humanity, but it's exploitative to create somebody just so you can enjoy the fun part, send them off into the world, which is diminishing in its ability to well care for people. And you mentioned the right to procreate. Well, what we really need is the right, we have that. What we need is the right to not procreate. We don't have that. There's far more restrictions on the right to not procreate than there are on the right to procreate. So what VHEMT is talking about is freedom, not control, not taking away people's freedom, but giving people more freedom. People need the freedom to use contraceptives. They don't want to procreate.
Do you think that people are aware that they have the right to choose what they want, or do you think that they're being forced? Like, do you feel like that they know that they're being forced? Because I can rattle off a list of examples that are subliminal type things of commercials or advertisements with kids in the back seat of the car, or movies that have a small child involved into it. Yeah, that impacts a scene the way the director probably thought of it, but the unintended consequence of that is that you have people thinking that this is the idea that they got to aspire to have, sitting and having a picnic with your family. Can your family just be you and your partner? Does it have to include a small child?
And it doesn't even need to include you and your partner. People can remain single. That is another part of natalist conditioning, is our getting people to think that pair bonding is what, people do. And after that, of course, then they procreate. But the using it in advertising is very common, uh, because people will go, "Oh, that's so cute," and they are cute, but it's once again exploitative to use them to sell products.
Well, it's hijacking the family value aspect that a lot of people are kind of instilled with, depending on where you're from. If you're from a Christian household, that's like you got probably strong family values as well too. But when you're talking about, or when we're talking about hijacking, using advertisements, it hijacks the family values. It's literally preying upon something that everyone knows that everyone can relate to. It's kind of like when you see a dog on the street and they see the like, or the SPCA commercials that show Sarah McLachlan holding a dog that's been abused or something like that. That gets everybody wanting to adopt a dog. But then next they play a commercial or one of those same commercials with an African child talking about donate 5 cents. More people are going to donate to the dog because that just pulls at our heartstrings more. Because usually everyone in their family had a dog, had some type of animal, a small little pet, and rather than another person. But when you're a parent looking at that commercial, you see it differently. Because if you have a kid, you look at that like, oh, I want to donate and help. But instead of creating your own, why don't you just adopt in a sense as well too? There's already kids out there. They're not going anywhere. So you just look at it like you'll be able to actually help and make a life better as well too, instead of creating a new one.
Adoption is an option. It's a very difficult one. It should be made easier, but people do react emotionally to those ads for both our domesticated animals and our younger people. But that's, I think we need to care for those domesticated animals that have been abused and not breed more of them. Like one of the bumper stickers we have is "Thank you for not breeding." And when people see that, they say, "You mean dogs and cats?" And I say, "Well, all domesticated species, especially humans."
That see that to me is like I can already picture what their look back at you will be like, what's wrong with you? Just because that's such a foreign topic for so many people to be like, what, you don't want people to have kids? Like you should be, usually when you hear someone go, is this your first child? They go, yeah. They go, oh my God, you get like a special present, you get a congratulations. People are having gender reveal parties. Like that's the crazy thing is, you know how many fires started because of that? And I know nobody's that wants to talk about that but me, but still, like that's an issue as well too. That's another unintended damage. But we look at like the whole entire aspect. If you walked up to a regular person on the street who might not be a part of this movement or part of this circle that you're involved in, and you said you shouldn't be able or you shouldn't have kids, they would just immediately go, why the hell would you say that to me? And then they would be upset. But then if you explain the bigger issue, which is that we are impacting this earth, and it's actually more responsible for you as a person not to, you start to see their eyes be like, okay, I'm starting to get it. It's just very, very hard to do this type of movement or something like that, which is why I wanted to talk to you about it and try and find out effective ways of how you're doing it. Cause it's a tough topic for today's time. It's like if you mention something about a war, you mentioned politics. This is someone's right to create an image of their self, which is in a sense selfish. But at the same time, it's also what they want to do because they want their name to carry on.
Yes, well, the right to procreate has been abrogated by our ancestors, but I'm not advocating taking away the freedom to procreate. Quite the contrary. I'm advocating the freedom to decide whether or not to procreate. These gender reveal parties show that it matters to them whether they have a male or a female in a binary world. And so that shows some of their expectations for their offspring. They shouldn't care whether, of course, what gender they are going or sex they are going to have. When I present it as taking care of existing offspring, existing children around the world, it's a whole different thing than saying, coming right out and saying you shouldn't procreate. There is a organization here. It started in Portland and it's going all over. It's called Stop Having Kids. And they just come right out and say, you shouldn't have kids. They're on the street haranguing people, stop having kids. And as you can imagine, it doesn't go over too well. So we're more of a voluntary, I appreciate the sentiment, and we need as many different ways to get the idea out there. They are antinatalists. And so they believe, and I think they have a good point, that it's wrong for people to be having kids, procreating, creating new people who will grow up to be adults, if they're lucky. And if you feel it's immoral to do that, then you might get out there and say, stop doing that, and be very straightforward about it.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you ask the bigger question of would you rather create a new life or take care of one that's already out there? Like we talk about the gender reveal thing, predicting boy or girl that's going to probably debate their whole entire life, like they're already planning it in their head before they even know what the answer is. You're already setting up intentions, worried about where they're going to end rather than how that life is going to go. I mean, you have a lot of parents, and it's a factor of society as well too. My parents worked two jobs; they were never home, so basically raised myself in a sense. So you get to a point where it's like, I'm lucky. I'm the lucky one that turned out like moderately okay in a sense, not having like severe like drug addiction or something like that. But for a lot of people, that's a lot of people's kids. I mean, did anybody talk about the opioid crisis that was happening during this pandemic? A lot of people miserable turning to pills. I mean, that's a factor from the home as well, too. But a lot of times you see families with one kid that goes, oh, well, that's just we don't really talk about him. He's not the one to brag about or put on the trophy case. It's like, that's why we had three more. And it's like, well, there's your problem. Focus on the one you got, not worried about having extras in case one turns out or slips up along the way.
Yes, that's a large part of what we're suggesting is taking care of people that are already here, which we are not doing. As I mentioned, there are 2 billion people having food insecurity right now. So, and I don't want to go on about all the negative things
Yeah.
that are happening in the world, but they should be taken into consideration when we consider making more. I have talked with people who have never, ever in their whole life considered not procreating, just never for themselves. They have, they know about some people who can't, and maybe a few people who don't want to, but they figure that that's what they should do. As you say, cultural natalist, well, I called it natalist cultural conditioning. You mentioned it too, but didn't give it that name.
And from how long have you taken this journey? Like, how long have you been producing, or I would say moving forward this goal?
I started promoting non-procreation about 50 years ago, the early 70s. I joined an organization called Zero Population Growth, and their motto was stop at 2, which was pretty popular because that's what people were doing anyway. But I could see that stopping at 2 was far too many, the momentum of our population growth. And I thought we should stop at once.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been promoting ever since.
Have you seen more of a turnaround from the people that were giving you the reactions back then? Like, have you seen a lot more people be more willing to discuss or be open-minded to this type of thing?
At the tables and booths promoting VHEMT, people have always been in agreement. There are always a few who just are outraged by it. But for the most part, people are going, yeah, we really do need to have fewer. They don't usually say none, but I get a lot of agreement and have all over the years. I think people realize that we're overpopulated, even if, and probably even more so if they say, no, we're not, you're an eco-fascist. So maybe they protest us too much. They know that it's true, but they just can't accept it. And, there's a renewed opposition to not procreating and to suggesting that there are too many people. And it has become a social justice issue, whereas I think not being able to avoid conception is a social justice issue. But they are imagining that people who suggest that there are too many of us, immediately they jump to coercion, eugenics, genocide, and they lump it all into what they're calling eco-fascism. What we really have is repro-fascism, where people are forced to give birth. Coerced conceptions and mandatory motherhood is not unheard of around the world, especially in places where the patriarchy is the strongest. That's where the birth rates are the highest. Women have the least amount of say in their lives.
You're making me question everything I've kind of been like instilled with, like having kids and all this type of thing, only because I feel like now I'm on the brainwash side and you're trying to wake a lot of people up from like, hey, like pay attention. Like, that thing where you have this dream of having a house with moss on the side of it and you have 2 kids and a dog or whatever. That's been instilled into you. It's not supposed to be there. Well, you're not thinking freely in a sense. You're more just thinking of this is the goal to obtain because this is everything that you've been showed as being successful. And now I think you're having successful like billionaires that are kids being streamers and all that as well too, which might change the dynamic of future generations. Because our heroes that we looked up to there were scientists that people looked up to, there were actors that people looked up to, but there was always pictures of families. Usually it was always 2 kids, which leads into like a conspiracy thing. But I think you're going to start seeing a change as well too in the next what would you predict, I would say, in the next 100 years? You think that more people are going to wake up to this, or you think we don't even have that much time?
Yeah, the end of the world uh,
I hear it every
polls.
day. I hear it
Yeah,
every
I
day.
know, right. Well, there's 3 questions I ask people to consider is, if we continue as we are, how likely is it that by the end of this century, Earth will be inhabitable? Give it a percent. I don't think this is black and white. You can't say yes or no, but I would give it a high degree of probability that Earth will be uninhabitable by 2100 if we continue as we are. Now, how likely is it that we will not continue as we are, that we will collectively make the decisions to reverse our direction? And the third question is, how much assurance would you need that that Earth will be habitable in the lifetime of the offspring that you're going to create before you would co-create them? Do you want like 80% certainty that they will have a reasonable life? Do you want 100% certainty? Or maybe you figure, well, that's their tough luck. I just want to have a kid.
Yeah, about to say, I don't even think it, like, if you really honestly think about kids, like my grandkids, for instance, 100% probability that they're going to have a okay life. Man, I would bump that down to a 20% probability. Like
I'm afraid so.
it's not realistic if you really look at the grand aspect of how the world's been running. I mean, it just seems like right now we're in like the middle of like what would be like nuclear holocaust. Is that how the world's going to end? Like, that's the thing, is that it's so sensitive, all in the idea that, like, I feel like if you had a more open conversation like me and you just had, a better understanding, or just a talk about the ideas as well too, you're going to have a lot more rational discourse with everything. And I feel like it's a great way, like, people can just read a little bit about you and they can just be like, oh, well, this person's crazy or this person's this, but talk to you, have a discussion, and then they'll see things your way, the way you see things. It helps educate people more. That's all I've ever wanted for people to do, is be able to talk a little bit to each other.
I fully agree with you, and I'm glad that you're thinking about things differently. That's the whole idea. So when people come to the vehement booth and they just mindlessly agree, it's not as rewarding as somebody who comes and says, no, this is ridiculous. What are you talking about? And then when they go, well, okay, maybe there's something to this. No, then that's what I call success. Mindless agreement is not as good as thoughtful disagreement even.
Do you think about having like an experiment where there's like a control group and you have a study that might last maybe like 10, 15, 20 years, but in a certain area where it's unaffected, in a sense, where you have people that are able to live without having to reproduce, in a sense? Like, are you having any scientists that are giving you a theory or giving you your movement more than just a movement? They're having something that's being pushing it forward to, like, even if it's a Netflix documentary, but it needs to be more well known. I mean, in your area, it might be well known, but I'm all the way across the states, or I'm all the way across the country from you. Like, that's something that I had to do my own deep diving and searching into when I came across. Like, a lot of people probably around here don't know what that is. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way to make it more known and also more educated, in a sense, as well too. Like, Don't Look Up was just with Leonardo DiCaprio. That gave a bunch of climate hypotheses about extinction events, like Younger Dryas. That could be one for you. You just pick a movie for Netflix, or you have a scientist that actually puts your theory on the front thing of a debate or a type of thing, to be able to educate more audiences on a live television broadcast as well.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful thing. There have been several documentary filmmakers who have done preliminary videos of an interview, and then they go try to get funding. Producers are not interested in promoting this. People with money want there to be more people because they're higher up on the pyramid scheme. That's why you hear so much in the media that is corporate owned about not enough people to keep the economy running. It means their economy. The more people at the bottom of the pyramid, that means housing prices are up, rent is up, wages are down because people are desperate. And so that's a big obstacle to getting the message out that there are too many of us and we should stop procreating. There's no incentive to promote that. As far as the experiment, those experiments are running all the time on the planet. All people need to do is study what's going on. Places where they have reproductive freedom, what's their lifestyle like? People where they don't, what's that like? And so the experiments are running right now.
Hmm. I'll have to look deeper into that. Is there anything, when it comes to saying anything final to the audience out there listening, maybe not really a warning, or but more like a tip, like, hey, like a better, like things that you might use if you're at your booth, for instance, like things you would leave last few people with?
Yes, I think the idea of taking care of people who are already here is one of the most important ones. One of the slogans is, may we live long and die out. So live the best life you can, take care of existing offspring if you have any, don't create more if you haven't yet. And there are plenty of ways of getting involved in young people's lives if you really want to make their lives better. I've been a substitute teacher for over 40 years, and I like to think I've made a difference in some people's lives, made them better. So uh, I would say live your life as best you can in whatever way you think is the best. Be kind and don't procreate. Avoid debt too if you can, but that's a little hard to do.
That's a difficult. That one seems impossible. But I really appreciate you giving me your time. Is there a place where people can find your links, if you have your website, if you have a Twitter?
Oh yeah, vehement.org, VHEMT .org. If you type in human extinction, you'll probably find it, but voluntary human extinction, you'll definitely find the website there.
And I'll make sure I link it all in the description. I appreciate you for doing the podcast, and thanks for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.